Mr. Jared here, and we are going to be talking J-Talk with Mr. Jared, and let's start. Let's obviously keep things kosher and not make too much of a ruckus. I think Jared's more than adept at making these calls on Danny's show. So I'm looking very much forward to hearing what he has to say. All right.
Thank you for having me, Dylan. Happy to be here, buddy.
Excellent. And your audio sounds really good. Perfect. Okay. So you had a couple of things that you had topics that you wanted to start on. I'll ask you questions as you go along because I'm very ignorant to a lot of the things. I try to stay informed, but you are the guy to go to when it comes to studying this stuff. So, whenever you're ready, man.
In the beginning, God said, "Let there be light." And with that said, you get to the place in the Garden of Eden where Adam and Eve lived in peace and bliss and essentially ignorance to a degree. Life was simple. And along came the serpent. So when this idea of the serpent is discussed in certain schools, there's an understanding that what transpired between Eve and the serpent was not simply a conversation about knowledge, wisdom, and partaking of the fruit. Some circles, myself included, consider this to be.
Hold on a second.
Please.
I'm an idiot. I am so dumb. Let me. We've been unlisted. And this will show up when we do the um, when it plays back. But let me turn this public. I'm dumb. We didn't get too far anyway, so
No.
that's good. Um, all right, continue. Basically, I introduced Jared, and I had the video stream unlisted. He was talking about the Garden of Eden and the serpent, and really didn't get too far, so I didn't screw up too bad. So, without much more ado, Mr. Jared, go ahead.
The idea being at the point where Adam and Eve are in the garden and the the serpent approaches Eve, there's certain schools of thought and understandings that this particular moment wasn't just about partaking of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. What what transpired was Eve slept with the serpent and she was impregnated by the serpent and she showed these things to Adam and taught Adam about this act that she engaged with the serpent. And this is where Cain and Abel come into play. And Genesis 3:15. In Genesis 3:15, God says there will be enmity between your seed and thy seed.
I remember you saying that that quote before when we had talked. Um, the the action of her fornicating with the serpent, is that basically what you're quoting from that, or
Yes, when the Lord says there will be enmity between thy seed and your seed, he's speaking to Eve and the serpent.
because that, remember, I
And
had trouble kind of understanding that. So
and subsequently cast the serpent to crawl on its belly um, going forward. So the idea being that Eve has twins in her belly. Okay. And these twins are born, one being Cain, one being Abel. As we know, there's an offering that's given. I believe Cain gave wheat, if I'm not mistaken, as his offering, as he was a farmer and plowed the fields, and Abel being I believe a shepherd, if I'm not wrong on this one, he offered a sheep, and God favored Abel's offering. And according to the Bible, this upset him. But this actually gets into something interesting that we'll talk a little bit about later. There's allegories and other stories that are similar to this. This is mirrored in the story of Romulus and Remus, um, twins. They say that they were raised by a wolf, which is a whole other thing, but I believe it's Romulus killed Remus and founded the city of Rome. So after Cain kills Abel, he's cursed and banished to the land of Nod, and he receives the mark of Cain, which is a brand because he pleads with God, people are going to kill me. So this gets into the idea of the fact that there were people other than Adam and Eve in the world at the time that they were in the garden.
question though. So you have this quote about the enmity. Um, the reason I struggled with that was because I'm kind of not the best as remembering all the parts of the Bible, but where was that in the very beginning in Genesis when they start introducing all of this, or was that further on in Genesis?
So this is Genesis 3:15. This is not long after the discussion um of what's transpiring in the garden. So this is shortly after Eve partakes of the fruit.
Hold on a second. I'm sorry. Uh, Let me adjust something in my Zoom stuff. Vincent was saying that my volume is really low coming through. So that's probably something on my settings for Zoom.
Not a problem. One of the interesting things that we'll find is that there's actually more fulfillment of this prophecy later on in the Bible with Jacob and Esau. And funny enough, we may briefly mention Bigfoot in this conversation.
Oh, you know how much I love Bigfoot.
um, that said, there's an interesting relationship that eventually transpires between Esau and Jacob, which is reflective of Genesis 3:15. The idea that there will be enmity between your seed and thy seed. And not only is it reflected in Cain and Abel, and in my opinion, uh, the son of the serpent um, going off and having children with the people of the world and creating some of the early Nephilim and hybrids, aside from what transpired with the fallen angels in Genesis 6:4. So in Genesis, we also have the covenant which was made with Abraham, and Abraham was was promised by God um, essentially what is the land of Canaan, and his descendants would inhabit this land, um, be fruitful and multiply. And that particular area would stretch from Egypt to the Euphrates, and this corresponds with the Greater Israel Project, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But in Genesis 12, uh, 1 through 3, the Lord said to Abraham, "Go from your country and your people and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you." So that's one thing that Jews like to cling to when or evangelical Christians like to cling to when saying we must support the Jews. That particular passage is one that they very much like to hark on. But I think it's important to recognize that there were 12 tribes, 12 sons, and later on we'll get into the discussion that Israel and the covenant that is Israel are the followers of Jesus Christ. But that's something we'll dive into a little bit later.
So
Um,
one thing
Go ahead.
also, by the way, is obviously we both know who Sam Tripoli is, and one of the things that he talked about was uh, obviously you say a lot of times, by the way, that things are backwards. That like when their practice is to turn everything inverted and backwards. And so one of the things that he's discussed, I remember a long time ago, was that the possibility that Satan or Lucifer or whatever name that someone wants to give him was actually the good guy. Um, do you have any uh, thoughts on that or where that comes from?
Well, that's actually one of the core concepts and ideas in many mystery schools and um, certain aspects of the Gnostics, where they have this idea that um, God is the demiurge and he's keeping us in a cycle of essentially regeneration, and that in order to escape this world, you need to not reincarnate. That's kind of the Gnostic view, and that you could escape this prison planet that was created by God, and that one of the ways to do that is to practice crossing the abyss and returning. And the way to do this is to essentially travel and traverse the astral planes by allowing your soul to leave your body. And this is one of the things these people do at higher levels in the esoteric arts. Essentially, this is a practice that adepts um, attempt to master in hopes that they can return and incarnate into a family of their choice rather than um, be born into a cycle where they face judgment and their heart is weighed, so to speak, if you look at it from the Egyptian perspective, and they're then given a life reflective of the way they live this one. They hope to know the path when they die so that when they come to that moment, they can reincarnate into a family of their choosing. And this is an old practice that goes back to the Egyptians, and it's currently practiced by people today. But the idea that Lucifer is the good guy is very much a part of Freemasonry. And in Freemasonry, one thing you'll come to know should you reach the highest degrees, particularly the 33rd and those above them. Shriners know this. There's video footage of an older gentleman outside I believe, a Shriners Hospital, where an individual was doing some auditing and auditing in the form of looking for a Shriner who will spill the beans, and he gets a gentleman who talks, and he says that Lucifer is his guide, and Lucifer is wonderful, and Lucifer is um is good. And the idea is that it's akin to the Greek mythologies and Prometheus stealing fire from the gods and giving it to man. Um, Without Prometheus, man wouldn't have wisdom, man wouldn't have knowledge of the arts, understanding. And this actually gets into the idea of the fallen and Genesis 6:4. The sons of God came unto the daughters of men, took of them wives. These same men became mighty men of old, men of renown. So this is where we get Kronos, Saturn. Uranus, uh, Zeus, Jupiter. So
Okay, so some of the stuff that you were talking about was from different mythologies, right? Because that's why I was a little confused. I couldn't remember, was Romulus and Remus that was in the Bible, or was that Greek mythology?
that's Roman.
Roman, okay, Roman mythology. Okay. That's why I was a little
So
confused.
so in Rome we have uh, Saturn, Jupiter, um, Mars as Aries, Uranus as Saturn's father. So Saturn or Kronos was born to to Uranus, and there was a prophecy that he would um, kill his father, and then his son would overthrow him. So when he had his children, his wife hid Zeus, he hid Jupiter, stashed him away, and gave him a stone because he ate all the other babies to prevent this prophecy from coming to fruition. So according to the old stories, when the sons of God took wives from the daughters of men, they had children and they were giants. They were big, they were strong, and they ended up becoming your Hercules, uh, your Achilles, your Shiva. In India, they had these same stories, same situations, and in Mexico, they had the same stories, same situations. So, according to the Book of Enoch, there were 200 angels that came down. Semyaza, Semyaza being the leader. Okay, and what they did was they made a pact amongst themselves, which is similar to what we find today with modern day politicians and the evil cabals, where they agreed to engage in a deed that was heinous, and its whole purpose was to pervert God's will. And what they were going to do is they were mad that God had given the earth to man. They were first. They were pissed. It's like, your little brother being handed the inheritance, and you're you're just a little bit salty. And as a result of which, they wanted to defile his creation. So they went down, they took wives, and they made a pact that they were gonna teach men um, the arts, so to speak. So Semyaza taught them enchantments and root cuttings. Amoros um, taught them resolving enchantments. Barakel taught them astrology. Kokabel taught them knowledge of the clouds. Sorry, knowledge of the constellations, I beg your pardon.
And those are figures from which religion? That's from the
So
Hebrew?
this is from the Hebrew Bible.
Okay, because
So
so you went from Shiva to a couple of
yeah,
different places, so I was trying to
I,
keep up.
no, thank you for the sake of of that and clarification in that aspect. In Mexico, we have Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, which is the Aztec god, if I'm not mistaken, or Mayan, pardon. Then you have Kukulkan, which is also a feathered serpent. In Japan, you have dragons. In China, you have dragons. In Australia, you have the rainbow serpent, and Their offspring are called the Wandjina, which are these interesting enough clown-looking creatures that have very distinct features that resemble gods in the Eastern world. In I believe it's Indonesia, they and Sri Lanka. They call it the Arakshasa or Rakshasa. And what these creatures are, what these things are offspring of the Nephilim and humans. If you get into Hebrew, the word seraphim means stinging serpent or like fiery serpent, and Lucifer being God's right hand man at the time and the closest who are to God in the heavenly pantheon in the order of angels are the seraphim. So there's this idea that they have somewhat of a reptilian um, nature about them, and this is where we get the passage that the serpent will be forced to crawl on its belly, and that indicates that at this particular moment in time, it was walking upright when it was in the garden with Eve. So these creatures, um, these fallen angels and their offspring spread all over the world, and they told the people, "We're your gods. This is how you worship us." Um, and it usually involved blood and virgins and children uh, most often, and we'll find a little bit of that later on, and or if we go back to the Bible and Moloch worship. But in particular, most frequently seen in the demands of the gods around the world, they demanded blood. It was usually an offering of blood in some fashion.
What is that about? Why the blood? Why what's so valuable about that to these certain um, creatures? If you didn't answer that already, I'm sorry. I was
No,
trying to
no,
get at my
that's
audio.
actually that's actually a really good question. And um, some people believe that these particular entities feed off of a particular type of energy, and that energy can be harnessed and concentrated in the blood in the form of fear, in the form of anxiety. And this is where we get what is it, adrenochrome,
Yeah,
and the practice that these these celebrities and elites are doing, feeding on this particular substance for the purpose of nourishing these entities which are attached to them. So um, this is something you and I have briefly discussed. I'm not sure if people in any of the listeners are familiar, but there's an individual by the name of Dr. Jerry Marzinsky, and Jerry Marzinsky was a clinical psychiatrist at the largest mental institution in North America, if I'm not mistaken. I forget how many acres he said it was, 160 acres, something of that nature. Um, he spent over 20 something years at this facility. He was an atheist going into it. And at a certain point, he came to understand that there were patterns associated with people who suffered from schizophrenia. One of the patterns being that they never heard positive things from the voices that were speaking to them. There was never like encouragement or enthusiasm, um, uplifting words from these voices. They tended to be self-deprecating and reinforcing um, faults in the individual and highlighting general doubts the individual already held about themselves. They tended to be magnified. And he also found that these entities didn't like when the people were on the drugs that they were given, the psych meds, because it quieted their ability to connect with these individuals. And they also didn't like when the individuals shared information with others about the conversations that they were having because they didn't want the world to know exactly what it is that they were doing and the manner in which they were operating. And in time, Dr. Jerry Marzinski came to the understanding that these individuals were possessed by demons. And this is why these people, these celebrities, these practicers of the dark arts, people like Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons, um, just to name a few. For those who don't know, Jack Parsons was the director at the Jet Proportion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. He was good friends with L. Ron Hubbard, and he was a practitioner of magic.
And he
That
also they found pictures of him fucking his mom.
oh, that's interesting and not something I was aware of. Thank you for bringing that to my my attention. So these individuals are sick, and we'll get into a little bit about the kid fucking, the mom fucking, and all that stuff later on if we get to Zabatai Zevi. Um, but this is actually similar to what you see in the pantheon of the gods, where they would have relations with their sisters and and their cousins, and the reason for doing this was to maintain their bloodlines, which is why we see the same inbreeding in the royals and the elites today. Why they're all cousins? Why Queen Elizabeth is related to Muhammad and Barack Obama? You know, that's how the fuck is Queen Elizabeth related to Barack Obama and you know the Prophet Muhammad? It's quite the spider web of genealogy on her end. But to get back on a topic, there's
Hold
a
on, before
a
you.
global.
Oh, I think I
Go ahead.
got it to stop doing that. So, one of the things, because you were talking about how blood is so important and kind of a commodity, one of the things, I don't know if I said it to you, I may have just said it on one of my streams, is that I was thinking about how money is kind of time or your effort and like a currency of like when you start printing out money that's lying and then lying is playing God, but what it really should represent is like time and effort that you're willing to contractually like trade with somebody. And the way that it goes and gets corrupted, as we're going to go, yeah, thank you guys. Sorry, I don't know why it kept minimizing. Now I'm too loud. You guys. All right. But
There's a movie with Justin Timberlake where he's got some sort of clock on his arm, and it's basically that concept
okay, really.
where
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
when your time runs out, you die, but you could buy credits, and like the super rich just
Yeah, because like it kind of does kind of equate to the the same thing of like this suffering, you know. So it is kind of, if you're really evil, you could be trading people's good hard-earned work, you know, and then also making it up. But I don't want to dwell on that too much. I don't want to sidetrack you, but that was just something
no.
that came up.
Blood is very much a currency in these circles, and particularly to these people. That's where we get the idea of vampires. This is very much associated with these old families drinking blood, and in order to for a vampire to come into your house, you have to let them in. It's very much
Yeah, it's something I always talk about with like specifically with you know, we were talking about the other day where you like not you like white people will go and complain about what's going on with them, but it was us that allowed this snake into the house, you know, and
correct.
that's my major take from a lot of Christianity, that like I've said it before, where I really got it from was Jesse Lee Peterson, because he'll have a person that was
Amazing.
have like a have somebody that went through something horrible, and they'll be like dwelling on it way too long. Even Sam Hyde just had a video recently about some guy that was 25 complaining that he's the last family member in his family alive. His dad just died. His whole family's dead. And he didn't really show him too much sympathy. And the thing about like being a man, or like taking responsibility as a Christian, it's like, okay, that's fine. You can sit there and cry about it. And even if it really isn't your fault, like let's say like the most extreme case of an abusive situation for you, then like, all right, can you forgive this person, or can you move on? And do you want to keep your life full of hate? Do you want to let God handle it? If it was such an intense problem for you, should you have dealt with it at the moment, or just not dealt with it at all and just moved on?
And that's kind of where one of those places where I think we are, just in terms of the world right now. There's a lot of accountability that's not being taken, or in looking at the situation that we find ourselves in today. And it's the culmination of, unfortunately, letting a certain particular group of people off the hook for a very long period of time. And so not only were these people taught knowledge of the clouds and constellations and astrology and enchantments, enchantments being, magic spells and sigils and works of that nature. They were also taught the signs of the earth, the signs of the sun, the course of the moon, the ability to track time, plan ahead for farming, and they were um, given by Gadriel um, cosmetics. Women were taught to trick men by prettying up themselves in a certain fashion, which was pleasing to the eye,
You know,
to
it's
the use.
interesting you say that too, because I remember like some little like trivia fact of like women back in the Egyptian times. That's when I remember like the first instances of me hearing about makeup or different like just scents or whatever. And that's kind of close to the biblical times as far as, when that was introduced, I would
Very
say.
much so. Very much so. So this is on par with the Egyptian pantheon. When the Egyptian pantheon has, I believe it's shit, let me pull up the book. Got it around here somewhere. I beg your pardon. There's a trinity in the same fashion that we find in Christianity. I believe it's uh, Osiris, uh, Horus, and Isis, and it's essentially um, God or Jesus, his wife, and then their I believe their son, if I'm not mistaken. But they all have variations of the stories, and these stories were passed down and given by the fallen angels. They essentially came to the people. They taught them um, the arts. They taught them how to create civilization. They taught them the use of weapons and killing blows, according to what Gadriel taught. He not only did he teach cosmetics, but he taught the use of weapons and how to use them to be most efficient to dispatch your enemies.
So,
And
so wait, when you say that they have the Trinity, so if the Egyptian Trinity was teaching these things as well, you were saying?
it's not the exact, but um,
Well,
it
the reason
it's
I'm
another
asking,
form of a trinity. If I could just grab this particular book
okay,
that I have, shit, it's around here. It is. It's right fucking next to me. Okay. So in this book, it's The Biggest Secret by David Icke. It's the first book I purchased, which explained to a certain degree um, the idea of God's interbreeding with man. He looks at it in this book as the result of reptilians from the planet Nibiru. He leans into the ancient aliens thing and Zachariah Sitchin.
can I ask you a
But
question while you're looking that up?
please,
So you were talking about the Trinity. So in the Christianity, the Trinity is, good. And what I thought you were going with originally was that the story of the Bible, how I guess it only takes place in one place, but how is this knowledge basically brought to the rest of the world? Because obviously it's going to be difficult. Um, I guess I guess because you're Mormon, you have a little bit of a different belief as to maybe the background, but the for instance, the Indians, like if God's offering salvation to everyone, if they have very similar stories, or like the Greeks had, was it Dionysus is always getting attributed to Jesus, even though like really what he represents is more wine and revelry, and then he has a staff, and it's not quite exactly the same. But how how do these how do these stories get transferred, or does the Bible get transferred to the different races across Earth? Or is it just there was just one central one, and what you're describing is false knowledge brought to different races that weren't near the centrality of the Middle East? Does that make sense?
no, I totally understand. So the way I'll look at it for the sake of this conversation is let's just say from the perspective of the biblical narrative that the fallen angels touched down on Mount Hermon. There were 200 of them. They made this pact, and then they set out to accomplish it. So this gives me the idea that these individuals had, from what I understand, if I'm not mistaken, um, wings. They could fly, and they just zoomed fucking on over to India. They just zoomed on over to Greece. They zoomed on down to Mexico, fucking Chile.
So they told inaccurate or dark traits to these people across the world, and the
Correct. But
only
every single one of those stories is real.
but what I'm saying is so when you because you described was it Horus, Isis, and the other
Osiris.
one Osiris.
Yes, sir.
So what they were teaching was dark knowledge. So
They were teaching things um they were teaching things that according to people like Freemasons, they would say they were teaching good things. They were teaching us knowledge of the clouds. They were teaching us how to follow the sun, the moon, and the stars. They were teaching us how to make metal tools, how to extract metal from ore and rocks. So,
but
in a
so I guess what I'm saying is so it was only the people centered around the Middle East where we know as what the Bible, like the location of all of these events were, they got the true history or the true story or lived through the events. That's
no,
like, does that make sense?
the way I look at it is they also, um, in the other countries, have the true story in the sense true that in the manner in which the fallen angels explained it to them, they were lying. So they weren't being honest. They didn't tell them um we're rebelling against our father, and the reason we're doing this is because we're pissed. And we want you to worship us so you don't worship God. So the
But
the
so
the
it
idea,
was only basically the centrality though of the Middle East that got the true experience versus these stories were kind of shaped to match the methods of which these angels wanted to teach, but they were based on the realities of what happened in the Middle East.
correct. And the reason we have this particular knowledge is because it was recorded and passed down. Um, the Book of Enoch being central and pivotal to this particular conversation. Um, at one particular time, was considered canon prior to the Bible being organized. At the Council of Nicaea, I believe it's 328, they decided what they were going to keep, what they were going to exclude, and at a certain point in time, I can't necessarily say if that was the time when they decided, but the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jasher, um, Jubilee, and Giants, and a few others were excluded. So there's officially 66 recognized books of the Bible, but the the knowledge as it pertains to the story of the fallen angels coming down and interbreeding with men and women. This was in its particular discussion as we're going to be having it today, um, found in the Middle East. But I believe there's very close allegories and um,
Because that's so what I was getting to there is specifically with Hinduism and the Indians, and it seems like what the the Mughal Empire, the Muslims were way, way, way past all of this. So it only thing over there was Hinduism, and according to what people say, as far as the timeline, is Hinduism is just as old, if not older, than Christianity, as far as the common understanding. So, and in
Sure.
in the
And
Bible, when in Jesus, I guess was it the three wise men come from the east? No, and they bring in knowledge.
the Magi, who were essentially magicians, who were following an old prophecy that was given that Jesus would be born. And this gets into why King Herod sent out an edict that all the firstborn sons must be killed because he was told by his oracle, his soothsayer, that he would be overthrown
That's like
by
Passover.
correct. That's exactly what we're speaking of, Passover.
Okay.
And so looking at it, let's just say from the Hindu perspective, their history is old, um, and the biblical narrative is old. What I'm saying is these things were happening at the same time, at the same place. So although history may say these things happened in India 20,000 years ago, or 30,000 years ago, or these things happened in Mexico 2,000 years ago, I believe that these things were all happening at the same time. They can mess with numbers all they want, and academics can fudge the timeline. But based on all the data that supplements one another, they were all worshiping um, the same group of entities, and they were fallen angels who took wives, had children with them. Um, they'd often marry or have children with the child because it had more of their blood. They engaged in things like gene splicing and high levels of science. There's reason to believe that they had electricity and advanced weapons. This is where we get these monstrosities of creatures, things like the Minotaur, an upright bull man creature trapped in a labyrinth that sole job is to just rip the people to shreds that are cast into it for whatever punishment they're
Do
deemed to have
do
have been
you
given.
believe the new is it a psyop of all the stuff that they found underneath the building with all this uh, uh, imaging? Do you believe all those new, like that new twisty thing going down there, or do you
Yeah,
think?
the columns that go deep within the earth underneath the pyramids. So I believe it was Edgar Casey, who is a um, an older gentleman who's no longer with us, but he was big in I believe like the early 1900s, if I'm not mistaken, late 1800s. But what he was doing was he was partaking in hypnosis and um, altered states through hypnosis, as well as more or less dreaming. And what he would do is he would go into these states and he would retrieve information and he would make wild and outlandish statements to the people that were in the room and heard them, but they would later go on to be substantiated by saying you have a tumor on the left side of your kidney that's going to kill you in 3 years if you don't have it removed. Doctors go in and they find the tumor.
Yeah, yeah, I heard that.
So he was known for making medical predictions and in a way that no one would have been able to do had they not had a particular gift. And one of the things he said was that underneath the Sphinx there would be a chamber found. And from what I understand, there's a chamber that's been found under the Sphinx, and they haven't allowed anyone to explore it, and they've probably already dug into it and looked into it. But it's allegedly supposed to be the library of uh, of Atlantis, if I'm not mistaken, something along those lines. So, do I believe that there's something to those structures, and it, are we being told what their use was exactly? No. Um, I, is there more to them? Yes. From what I understand, they were um, initiation um, temples. They were in their original use uh, a manner in which to get initiated. So you go into the depths, you go into the abyss, and you emerge reborn, similar to being baptized in Christianity, where you're you're dunked in the water and you emerge a new
And
person. But they were doing it in a different sense. They were also, as I said earlier, practicing the arts and acts of soul retrieval, crossing the abyss, and astral projection, leaving their body and um, returning with the purpose of when they die, they've practiced this before. They know the name of the game. So when that time comes, they're ready to rock, so to speak.
um, let's go because I kind of took you off a track. So we're kind of we're talking about Cain and Abel. I can't remember if you got to Esau and Jacob, and then
Let's
also
talk a little bit about Esau and Jacob.
I also want to get because you have next on that you said you wanted the formation of the 12 tribes, which is really interesting to me because of that uh, the notion on your next line of what is a Jew, where we don't have any kind of true ties. There's always the thing about the anti-Semitism and breaking that down as to why that's not true. That's I guess the lineage of Shem, right? Is that correct?
Correct. In
Okay.
order to be a Semite, you'd need to be a descendant of Shem, and more so of the region. When we get into talking about the Khazarians, for instance, they're not descendants of Shem.
Okay. So uh, go on about Esau and Jacob, please.
So Abraham made a made a covenant with God, and Genesis 15:18 through 21. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham and said, "To your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenzanites, the Kadamites, Hittites, Perizzites, Raphaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites. And one of the things we're going to see is that Jacob tricked his older brother. Um, he he deceived his older brother. In the book of Jasher, it states that Esau was a great hunter, and not only was he a great hunter, he was a warrior. He was a man of great stature, um, and he also happened to be extremely hairy. Okay, this is where we get into the the Bigfoot conversation. He was extremely hairy, so much so that when Jacob deceived his father and convinced Esau to give up his inheritance for a bowl of lentil soup, because Esau had just came from fighting Nimrod, who was also a Nephilim. It doesn't state this in the Bible, but it does in the book of Jasher, that he came back from fighting Nimrod, cuts off his head. He's exhausted, just had an epic battle with one of the greatest warriors in the world at the time. And he's tired, and he sits down at the table, and he sees that some food was cooked, and he's like, let me get a bowl of that. And his brother's like, I'll give it to you if you give me your inheritance. So in a very, kind of cunning way, Esau is like, dude, just yeah, you can have my inheritance. Like imagine, like your brother's like, give me your inheritance. He's like, dude, take it. Just give me that bowl. I'm hungry. So, but by doing so, um, he still needed to receive this blessing from his father. So, in order for the covenant to be upheld, and for him to receive this particular gift, it was up to his father to bestow it upon him. So, in order to trick his father with the blessing of his mother Rebecca, because what I forgot to mention was Jacob and Esau were twins, and if I may, I believe it was Esau who was born first. When he came out the womb, he stepped on Jacob's head, and Jacob was clutching at his heel. So
Yeah. I remember
this
you
goes
talking about this.
this goes back to Genesis 3:15, and that there will be enmity between your seed and their seed, and they will crush your head, and you will bite their heel. And so this particular prophecy that's given um, occurs again in the relationship between Esau and Jacob. So, in order to trick his father, he covers himself in a goat skin. Okay, because his brother Esau is so hairy that in order to trick his father, he had to put a goat hide on. So this speaks on and alludes to the fact that there's two bloodlines. There's again, um, we'll say a serpent seed for the sake of this conversation, but that serpent seed can manifest in many ways. Sometimes they're hairy monsters. You know that I don't know how old you are, but back in the talk show days, there was that
The hairy Mexican
the
family.
hairy Mexican,
Okay.
like this hairy Spanish dude. So this is a genetic thing that has manifestations to this day in our current population. It's not something that's extinct. It's not far-fetched. It's very much a genetic trait. You know, they got a movie Teen Wolf and shit covers the exact thing. So I believe the mother, Rebecca, knew that that particular baby what was not the one that she wanted to favor and didn't want to receive the inheritance because she knew it wasn't the right seed. So according to the Bible and according to certain people, there's a gentleman Prometheus Lens, I believe his name is. It's got a channel uh, doing this sort of thing. Long story short, he had described that when she was with child in the womb, when sh they would walk past certain people if they were worshiping idols and they were worshiping the other gods, Esau would get excited. And then if people were being righteous and worshiping, the God of Israel, Jacob would get excited. And this is something that's alluded to, and he does have a slightly different um, view on this than I do. That what becomes uh, uh, the children of Esau, um, the Edomites and Amalek, is the current fake Jews that we find ourselves, seeing today. This isn't exactly the Dustin Emos thing where I say these people are demon souls and things of that nature. But I believe that these families, these old families, these particular groups of people that lean towards satanic ritual worship are um, the descendants of Esau and this particular seed. And this goes to Cain as well because he had children. And it's the reason that God sends the flood years down the road.
So I don't want to lose this thought. So on one hand, you've kind of alluded to believers of reincarnation and them being, I guess, inaccurate, or that's a wrong telling or understanding, or that's a not good practice. But on the other hand, then we have what seems like, this is what fascinates me about the Bible and really got me really interested in it a lot, is the reoccurring patterns. And we're seeing basically almost a reincarnation of two spirits coming through at the same time over and over again of generations. And that's actually part of the knowledge that seems like was spread through these 200 angels that you described, um, describing that knowledge.
And
So,
and you find these same stories in multiple cultures that are very similarly resembling the story that we're currently discussing. And that is interesting that you bring that up, that um the idea of reincarnation as someone who's of the Christian faith, I don't have an issue with it, and I don't necessarily um see it in any way, shape, or form conflicting necessarily with what's stated in the Bible. We don't know exactly how things work.
and so with that, actually, that reminds me, because I never really thought about it this way, and it's kind of uh, grim. But there's a guy that I just started listening to. He's got a show called The Dance of Life. Do you know his channel?
I do not.
Okay, so he's very much what I believe a lot of times when I listen to him. For instance, like, you know, a lot of people will go after the Jews, but they never really credit the Catholics or a lot of these other religions for being uh, blasphemous or heretics or whatever. And I can't say for certain that I know these people are wrong, but from what just my trivial glances at the Bible and kind of understanding it pragmatically, that it seems just flat out lies for the most part. I would feel that Catholicism is very easy just to disprove as being an inaccurate faith. There's plenty of people that are Catholics that know the Bible way better than I do. But I guess so. He has a lot of like the similar beliefs, but one thing that I never really thought about, um, even though I tend to believe the same things that he does, is about when you die, that's it. And his, I'm trying to hard like understand his idea of just like your soul is your body, and but then that would also kind of tie in with what you're saying is if the idea of reincarnation is wrong, at least or part of the wrong tellings by those 200 angels, then it would kind of make more sense that the soul. Oh wait, no, actually, you know what? He does speak about when Jesus comes that you do get possibly reincarnated. But like I guess you're not sent off to some heavenly body, or
No,
there's no.
you are reborn. You do get a body again, it says. And if you look at Buddhism, the purpose of achieving nirvana is to escape reincarnation. And I believe the idea of these elites and what they're trying to practice is they're actually hoping to continue reincarnating because they don't want to be judged. They don't want to cross that particular junction in the road because once you cross that particular place, I don't know if they can reincarnate into the family of their choosing like they hope, where let's say you're reincarnated after you're judged and your heart is weighed from a Egyptian perspective. Let's just say that's the case. Um, they lose the ability to have control over the mechanisms that dictate where they land.
So is that a different mindset than like let's say vampires that will live immortally, but also then we've got the real life people in our generation that are injecting young blood into them and then living and seeing like a reversal of aging by
100%.
paying for that. So that's
Yeah, I
two
don't believe that
different.
there's immortality, so to speak, in a physical sense. Like, there are schools of thought that a particular Buddhist monk transferred his body, or sorry, his soul into that of like an 8-year-old boy, and then went and lived with the family. And then when he turned 13, he just dipped out.
I think that's
I
Ashoka.
it's a very interesting story if you're familiar with it in details. I don't recall it in its entirety, but it was something I had heard recently on a podcast I was listening to. But the idea that you can escape death through reincarnation, or you can end the cycle of reincarnation, or you can be reborn in a particular family of your choosing is very much a part of certain mystery schools and religions of days past. How it relates to Christianity in terms of what happens to us after we're resurrected and what does that look like, I can't exactly say. But it's fair to say we are going to get another stab at this, and as long as we're doing our part, we're going to be given a perfect body and be reborn and hang out with our Heavenly Father, which is an interesting concept. But
Yeah, that's hard. That's hard to picture. Like I try not to even like dwell on that because it's just like it's such an impossibility to understand what that means.
correct, and will that be here on Earth and in a world that's perfect, like the Garden of Eden? Is that a place on a spiritual plane? Um, some say that's here on Earth. So it's just a matter of your interpretation of um of the scripture. But I want to briefly get into the Jews and uh, their exile from this land. So if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's Joshua. Joshua and a few others are sent out into the desert to scout out the land. And when they get there, they see giants, and bunch of dudes are scared. They're like, we're not doing this. There's no way we could do this. But he's he's steadfast in his belief, and he understands that this land was promised to them. So he they end up gathering up the people. They encircle what is the city of Jericho. There was a fort there. They, I believe, played trumpets, if I'm not mistaken. It's probably in some way, shape, or form a weapon, which caused the walls to crumble. I assume it's some sort of sound weapon that was given to them by the fallen angels and the individuals that they made pacts with when they wandered the desert for 40 years. So after the Israelites were liberated from Egypt under Moses, they wandered for 40 years due to their disobedience to God. Um, they are eventually welcomed into the land of Canaan after taking the land and eradicating the people that were there. But they were told by God that they were to leave nothing alive: man, woman, child, beasts. They were to destroy them all. Um, they didn't do these things. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Saul and Solomon were also given these particular orders. But the land is divided into 12 tribes, and the the 12 tribes each had their own particular thing that they did well. Um, when the 10 tribes were sent into exile, in captivity in Babylon, um, it was as a result of them engaging in idolatry. And this was the main reason that they were sent. into exile and punished. So in Acts 7:43, it says, "Yea, you have taken up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of your god Remphan, idols you made to worship. Therefore, I will send you into exile beyond Babylon." And for those unaware, Remphan um, is also known as Chiun, Chiyyun, or Chiun. It's also spelled, and this is associated with Saturn. So they were engaging in Saturn worship. Um, God was pissed. So this is again fallen angel worship.
By the way, so we have uh all of like in like the Greek and the Roman theologies, we have like these gods that have a certain quality to them also. Kind of like what you're describing is these tribes also have a certain quality to them. Um, and one of the thoughts that I had about these or not tribes, but these gods is that the way that they were false gods is that they were at what we have now. Um, don't we have 12 families that like isn't that 13 or 12 families that rule the world? Isn't that what the conspiracy is? And
You often hear about yeah, 12 or 13 families that kind of run the show. And this gets into the 12 symbols of the zodiac, 12 months of the year, 12 apostles.
well, what I'm getting at, I guess, is their false assumption because uh, I'm assuming back then, I mean, people still had relatively the same intelligence, but they didn't have the ability to share information. So when you have somebody that's so all powerful from one kingdom, they revered a lot of these leaders as gods and lords. I think, weren't you describing to me the no someone else describing how like the popes will refer to themselves as a lord, and what these groups are that these people were envisioning what what a actual god was, and worshiping these multiple gods were just like your Elons and your Schwabs and your Soros and all that of back then.
Oh,
Is that
100%. And not only were they um these celebrity like figures, but dude, these things were huge. They were buff, like according to like the story of Hercules, he was given these tasks. The dude like threw a lion like on his shoulder and carried it away. I mean, the feats of strength that these things were able to do, they were the ones that built these amazing buildings. They were fine craftsmen.
but
They
then
were
so like that's it's not biblical. That's not a biblical story. So that's an embellishment. And that's why I'm saying that like so these acts of these people that can get things done that are so powerful, to those people they're like, well, that makes sense, they weren't there for him to throw the lion over his shoulder, or maybe he could do that, but like building these pyramids, it, today, even today, when we have the ability to record things, uh, we also like people are getting fooled just by AI. And even before the AI videos came into play, um, people were making like basically Photoshop edits of pictures all the way since we've had color photos. There's ways that they
100%.
used to edit photos. So that's I don't want to bring you too far off track, but that just kind of what strikes me when you bring up certain numbers and then these repeating patterns. It's just like if we
What they would
repeat,
do is they would try and be as close as possible to the real story, but they would interject themselves or put a slight twist on it because as we know, the best way to tell a lie is keep it as close as possible to the truth, and you just make that small little tweak which swings things in your favor. So the whole purpose of these stories were to gain worship. They wanted to be worshipped, to take away worship from God, to look at it just at a as a biblical framework, from a biblical mind. They wanted to piss God off, so they went about and they told these individuals, "We are your gods. We created you. This is your creation story." And they did teach people some amazing things in the sense that the idea of pulling metals out of the ground and smelting iron, mixing it with carbon and making steel is
You know, what's interesting is you bring up this worship of false idols or people, and obviously we have right now going on with social media, uh, like you know. By the way, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. Um, that like everyone gets their fame off of the internet or likes and all that shit, you know. But there's an ancient story of Beowulf, which takes place in the like I guess kind of Germanic English tribes, because it's like the oldest English literature that there is. And what the story is kind of is it gets compared a lot to Jesus. There he goes to fight a mighty monster Grendel, and then comes back to the surface after going down there and killing its child, and um, it's it's often reflected like a similarity to the Jesus story with resurrection. But the main thing, the story of it, is that your eternity, your legacy, or your immortality is proportionate to your fame. That's like the
mm.
fame comes from that. And so, like, one of the most important people in the world, obviously, the most famous people is Jesus. But I don't know what you think about the tie to the English being a very strong lead. Maybe I'm kind of leading you into this conversation a little early about how you started to talk about Jews in England, because that kind of seems like maybe that could be where that started if they've got none of the actual real tribes that came up there.
So for just for the sake of leading into that, I wanted to briefly just discuss we don't necessarily know what transpired after the I believe it was Persians freed the Israelites from Babylon, and so the northern kingdom was lost to Assyrian conquest in 722, and the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, which formed the southern kingdom, um, remained during this period. And the Babylonian exile was 586, so roughly 140 years. I beg your pardon, 160 years, depending on how it's in reverse. But long story short, we don't know what transpired of the 12 tribes.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you. So
So
someone in the
we know that there
chat.
were in Rome. We know that the Jews were in Rome at the time of Jesus and leading up to Jesus's death. We know that they were um, heavily involved in the fall of Rome as a result of their involvement in central banking. One of the things I will be discussing today is a book by the name of Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind by Stephen Mitford Goodson. And then in this particular book, he breaks down the Jews and their influence on the fall of Rome uh, as a result of
So let me just bring this up because Slav is saying the crown of England was captured by the Jews when they became indebted to Aaron of Lincoln in 1190. The fa-
Aaron and Lincoln at one point was owned 25% of the land as a result of a system which allowed, um, if I'm not mistaken, him and his ilk to implement interest rates 33% annually on noble lands and 300% on trade tools. So if you were a tradesman or an apprentice looking to get started, um, it was essentially like buying a 30-year mortgage. You know, you were in the hole and working to pay off the interest rather than um, ever really making any headway. I mean, a 300% interest on trade tools is insane. And yeah, by 1186, Aaron of Lincoln was England's richest man, wealthier than King Henry II. And within 2 generations, 1/4 of the English lands were in Jewish hands.
but so what I
Um,
wanted to bring up with that date was because so you've got uh, Jews taking over in in that time, and then you've got the fall of Rome, which was let's say 476 A.D. is what's coming up. Um, but then the date of Beowulf occurs between 700 and 1000 A.D., which would be interesting to see if their travel and movement from after that then kind of bringing up that kind of pagan uh, idea of Jesus traveled along with that into the capture of England. That's kind of where I
I,
was going with that.
well, I very much do believe that the majority of these European peoples that are of a certain phenotype are of the lost tribes. I also believe that some of the Native Americans are of the lost tribes. Are they of just one in particular? It's hard to say. I don't want to say if there's multiples, but there is reason to believe, according to certain bits of information, um, there's someone in your neck of the woods by the name of Dr. Narco Longo, and he's an individual who has done great research on the state of Florida, and he speaks of a group of people called the Timucua. And the Timucua are in the area
Oh, I know
in
him.
in close proximity to the Seminoles. And what is that word? Semite, Seminole. They're essentially what is old. It's like Creole, Seminole. They're
Yeah, and obviously we have like the stories of the owl totems attributed to that, and then you go into the Rockefellers. That's getting a little
well,
past
dude,
what
and
we're
then
talking. But
It is, but I just wanted to briefly say they have reasons to believe these people are of the lost tribes based on their practices. They're doing um particular things that very much resemble old Jewish customs, like wearing that big hat made of animal furs, like that big round one. They have that same thing. They have a curly little head thing, uh, curly sideburn type look that they would do. They also engaged in sacrificing their firstborn, so they were upholding old Abrahamic covenants before.
oh yeah, that was brutal. I guess you know about those mounds of children's bodies.
And not only that, there's like stones that are associated with where they would perform these rites. Like one is at like some bar, and I forget what neck of the woods it is in Florida, but it's
I think
got
it's
a
St. Augustine.
it's got a wooden structure. Yeah, I think it is St. August. It's got a wooden structure around it, and it's an old stone that they used to bash baby heads on. And uh, the Rockefellers um, had an affinity for these people, and they purchased some land in that area. But this is getting into digression. But for the sake of this conversation, let's just jump to England. And so at this particular time, when speaking of England,
Well,
we
before you
have
do that, can you break down? Do you know the? So we were talking about the 12 tribes. Can you describe to people this notion of Semites and the anti-Semites, and I guess that's branching off the children of Jacob. Is that correct? I'm so
so that
bad with
there's
this.
there's Shem, there's Ham, and there's Japheth. And if I'm not mistaken, um, the people who would consider themselves the Ashkenazi, uh,
Noah's three
a,
sons. Okay.
a lot of the modern day Jews are descendants of Japheth, if I'm not mistaken, and not Shem. So Shem would be the line that gave us the Palestinians. So that's or the Philistines, that matter. And this is where we get the word Semite from. So in order to actually even claim being a Jew, the word Jew is more of a modern creation. They were Judeans, which meant that they were of the tribe of Judah. And that just means one particular group of Israelites of the 12 tribes. Mind you, there was tribe of Manasseh, the tribe of Benjamin, tribe of Levi, which were the priestly caste, which is where we get the modern day Cohens. So allegedly, all Cohens are supposedly um, related to these Levites, but I don't necessarily believe that. I'm of the belief that these people are wolves in sheep's clothing. They are the Edomites. They are the children of Esau, and they're one of the reasons we have reason to believe this, at least in our or my particular school of thought, is I believe the word Amalek, if I'm not mistaken, had a translation something along the lines of like blood liquor, and they were known to practice witchcraft and divination, and these are the things that the Jews were doing, that they were constantly being rebuked for by the Lord. This is the reason that they were sent into to exile. This is the reason that they were punished, because they were engaging in the things that were taught to them by the fallen angels, and they weren't upholding their end of the covenant. Yeah, which is part of the reason why Jesus Christ was necessary. But that's another story for another day. But so Jews, modern Jews, in the sense they're not Judean. They are in no way, shape, or form in relation to these people, even if Sephardic. Perhaps there could be a small percentage of people who are Mizrahi Jews, um, Arabic Jews who would be considered um, Semites and could even be um, of the tribe of Judah. But to consider the Ashkenazi in any way, shape, or form, like our buddy Danny Polishchuk, um, he's and they are not they're not Semites, and to even call them Jews is somewhat dubious. So they do practice a form of Judaism, which became uh, somewhat of a united way of of worshiping. Allegedly, these things first became written down and set in stone around 600 AD, so not BC. And prior to that, the majority of what Jews engaged in, aside from the laws that they were given by Moses, were the oral traditions of their elders. So when Jesus was in the temple and he's rebuking them and he's arguing with them. I don't know if this is the exact time where he overturns the tables and pulls out the whip on the money lenders, but he's having a conversation and he states that um, you're following the traditions of your elders. And what he means was the Babylonian Talmud. So, mind you, this was 500 and something. Let me go back. 500 and some odd BC when they were cast into exile and they were hanging out in Babylon doing Babylon stuff. So not only were they um, enslaved in Babylon, it doesn't sound like they were treated too poorly if they were picking up habits and rites and rituals of the people that suppressed them.
It's interesting you bring up Babylon because, like, one, you started talking about the Persians. So I had two questions. So we have one, you've got the Babylonians. Let me get back to that. But as far as Hitler, so Hitler was obviously not too particularly fond of Jews, from my understanding, and his fascination with the Aryans was. Is there any like um, I don't really know exactly what Hitler's true beliefs were as far as religion. Some people say he was atheist. Some people say he was a Rothschild. Some people say he was particular to Christians or Catholics because he worked with them. But the Aryans, is there any idea that comes to mind as far as those being one of the 12 tribes of Israel and
Yes,
then them being Jewish?
and that is very much something that is an idea floated around in these conversations. When you start saying that the real Jews are the Aryans, people are like, "Whoa,"
Well, that's
you
what
know.
the guy from Ruby Ridge, the group that he was involved with, was
And
basically.
dude, I like when you're speaking of Beowulf roaming the woods. speaking of allegories that closely resemble Jesus, that sounds to me like one of the 10 lost tribes, the 12 lost tribes, 100%. When we look at the Scythians, the Goths, the Celts, the Huns. So, according to Armenians, their leader who helped create the kingdom of Armenia was Hike. Hike was a great warrior. He was a bowman, and he defeated Nimrod. It sounds like exactly like Esau. It's literally Esau's story, but they look at it from the perspective of their particular land. But they had gods before that. They were doing Mithra worship at a certain point prior to Noah's Ark landing on Mount Ararat, and then the Armenians believe that their people, prior to the rape by the Turks, were blonde-haired and blue-eyed. I've met Armenians that looked like crazy, dude, like a Norwegian. I'm from Glendale, California, which has a large Armenian population, and full on looking like a Swede, and he was Armenian. So according to um, their people were originally blonde haired and blue eyed. So I do believe that if you look into the lost tribes, it's fair to say to a certain degree, most of the Aryan people are going to be of this stock, if not all of them.
Okay. And um, the other thing about the Babylonians, you're saying, uh, do you remember what time period that was?
Babylon was five. Give me a second.
I mean, I guess I could have looked that up, but
Five 586 BC.
okay. Um, and so with the Babylonians, one of the things that was also tradition, like we were talking about with reincarnation, um, uh, a guide at the gates of death, traversing, and also having guards. I think it was the Babylonians and the Assyrians both had those very similar to the Sphinx, where it's like a winged lion creature that
Mm.
kind of guarded it, and I believe that was kind of like you traversed the afterlife with that, or as a guardian. They put it at the entrance of a lot of their cities, but
I believe in Greek mythology, it's like a three-headed dog named like Cerberus. So it's very similar. It's always there's this creature who guards and I don't
oh,
know,
that's
stops
right.
you from coming back. If you try and traverse the the abyss and then come back, maybe it stops you from coming. I don't know exactly how the ritual works, but it's supposed to be the process in which we are reborn or go on to the next life or reach judgment. In it varies in different cultures, but it has many similarities and parallels if you look at it from a bird's eye view.
Um, I think we'll go on for another 9 minutes because I have work tomorrow, and
No,
I,
sure.
I I would love to keep going on this. You started to get on to the 12 tribes.
Well,
Uh,
briefly before we jump into England, we gotta talk about the Khazarians. So,
okay,
and I can cover this quickly.
sure.
So The Khazarians were uh, a Turkic group of people from the, the Asian steppes, and they were originally um, pagan. They had no um, affinity or association with the Islamic faith or Christianity. And what transpired was in a certain amount of time, they ended up getting encroached on by I believe it was Christians to the east and Muslims to the west, something along those lines, if I'm not mistaken. And in order to avoid conflict and maintain their stranglehold on um, their influence on the Silk Road trade routes and the systems which allowed them to acquire wealth and be fruitful and prosperous as a people, they converted to Christianity. Pardon me, they converted to Judaism for the sake of remaining neutral to the powers that be, which surrounded them. So they were a people that consisted of raiders and traders. So they would often rob people blind if they found them on the route, if they could do business with them and set up long-term relationships. They did occasionally do so. They had a capital on I believe it's the River Don, if I'm not mistaken. But what transpired was in the 10th century in the 900s and the 960s, the Rus, uh, Scandinavian group of people who came down from what is modern day Sweden, traveled down the Volga, made their way to what is currently um, the area of Kiev, and they captured and they sacked a city by the name of Sarkel and their capital of Atil, and that eventually led to the collapse of the Khazarian Empire and displaced them and um, saw them move west, and will eventually get to their their time in England as a result of a safe haven that they were given. Jews began arriving in 1066 after William the First conquest, and they were practicing usury and controlling a significant amount of land by the late 1100s. So it didn't take long for them to dig their roots in, spread their tentacles, and implement what it is they do. So I don't want to dive any deeper into England, but
Because
just for the
in
sake of
in the
go
notes
ahead.
you have when you start talking about the Khazarians, you're talking about modern day Ukraine, and that's what you were just mentioning, correct?
100%. So you know what? We can cover this because we got a little, just a short amount of time. We can wrap up on this. This is where we find ourselves today, where um, Jews are attempting to retake this piece of land, um, and they're not only retaking this piece of land to create um, Greater Khazaria 2.0. Not only are they creating Greater Israel, they're creating Greater Khazaria, but they're also attempting to get back at the Rus which booted them from the area, whooped their ass, and expelled them. So they're going about killing as many white Christians as possible on both sides of the war. The Russians and their Jewish handlers are throwing Caucasian Christians to the meat grinder, as is Zelensky, the cokehead actor who plays the piano with his dick, who was implemented after Ukrainian billionaire created a TV show which garnered Zelensky popularity. Then he created a political party which made Zelensky its um, face and spokesman, and then they brought him in. They had backdoor deals going on. There was a coup in 2014, um, which implemented the government, which would allow this to be possible. Then we find ourselves where we are today. Um, we got Greater Israel and Greater Khazaria, um, vanity projects of fake Jews from the synagogue of Satan. Um, that kind of sums it up. We'll be digging further on on another date. Should you want to do this again? We're just kind of scratching the surface, and the purpose of today was to gloss over these things and have a brief conversation on the history of the Jew, and then we can dive in further into more detail into these specific events in history, like the period of the Khazarian Empire or the period of the Jews in England and their um, expulsion and reintroduction and so on. So,
So I have a question
um,
about what you were saying with that you were saying that Jews were forcing people to convert, or the Jews were being forced to convert.
so in Spain in 1391, um, Jews were forced to convert to
Okay.
Christianity. So Jews have never um, forced Judaism on anyone else, but they have assumed the role of Christians and forced Christianity on others or forced Islam on others. There's reason to believe that Islam was created by Jews to use the people of the Middle East as a weapon against Christians.
Yeah, there's a
So,
lot of similarities with as far as the way that they decide to spread their message and the idea of David. But the reason I was asking that is because, from my understanding, like there's all these uh, great mathematicians specifically that were converted to Islam, and some of them were attributed to being Jews, or a lot of people, in order to survive. Like, I think algebra, I want to say, possibly, or the guy that back in the day calculated like the circumference of Earth using like shadows and like the distance to the sun from the Earth using shadows, was like a convert to Islam. Um, and so I didn't know if that played into what you were saying or not.
well,
Um,
I hadn't tied it that in specifically, but I did want to state, being it's being discussed now, um, very, very, very rarely do Jews genuinely convert to a religion outside of Judaism. There are cases. I don't want to say that it never happens and that um, these people aren't genuine because it's fair to say, like, I don't know, Slav was giving us some props not too long ago about what we were saying. It sounded like he's a Christian. But, I mean, just based on it, I mean, whether he's a Jew or not is debatable. If he takes the Bobby Fischer approach and he renounces his, you know, but with that said, I, I I do have difficulties with conversos and converts who are Jews. It is very much a contentious argument to be had. Like, was that individual who converted to Islam and introduced the measurements of the circumference of the earth, was he truly a follower of Muhammad at that point in his life, or was he still practicing Mazit's Bepa on Saturdays? And it's hard to say, and we don't necessarily know for sure, but based on individuals like Zabbatai Zevi, um, a Jew who introduced Sabbatean Frankism in 1666, and Ignacio Loyola, son of a converso, who created the order of the Jesuits. It is fair to say, um, more often than not, 99.9% of the time, Jews don't convert, they subvert.
So, and I guess that's maybe one of my final thoughts that I'll bring up is that I believe I discussed it with you as far as when there's a constant, sorry, still dealing with some cold. Um, there's the idea of like Nietzsche brings it up of staring into the void and the void stares back. And we were talking about, um, I think I was talking to you about it. Whereas you convert people to Christianity, but it also it brought a lot of pagan rituals from it. So when you convert somebody, you're looking into the void as well and bringing uh, um, their pagan rituals into them, and then that's how you get like the Jesuits or the Catholics into Christianity, and it kind of just persists, with these converts.
Well, very much people will bring aspects and remnants of their culture that eventually were intertwined and became a part of Christianity. Things like oh, what's a good example? The date that's used for Christ's birth. Okay. Um, December 25th, Christmas. But other people say that like according to the Bible,
It was like in
Jesus was
June
born in the yeah, he was
or
born in like the
July.
spring or something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
or it wasn't December. And the reason that they use that particular date is it's symbolic of the the winter solstice, and if the winter solstice is on the 21st or 22nd, and then Jesus dies and is reborn after 3 days, technically that would be like the 25th, and it's sun symbolism of for the new year. I, I try and not get bogged down too much on things of that nature. Like I wanted to pull up some of the scripts from this particular book that say, who am I talking about? He was born of a virgin. He was this, and this, and the other. And he says, oh no, that's Osiris, or that's Mithra. And we'll briefly discuss it next time. But these stories do permeate throughout all history, and I believe the ones that are not particularly associated with Jesus Christ are either inversions, um, twists, and outright lies to direct the worship from our Heavenly Father to the fallen angels.
Okay. Do you have anything else that you want to kind of end with?
I just want to thank everyone who tuned in today. There was a little bit of apprehension on my end. This is my first time doing this in this capacity. I tried my best to keep it polished, keep it tight, and I beg your pardon if there were any hiccups and mishaps along the way. But thank you everyone who took the time out of their evening to be here.
Yeah, it was more so my fucking end is my audio wasn't good apparently at the very beginning. Yours was coming through clear. Um, but it's very interesting because even me trying to like I'm not um I'm not like I don't have like an eternal hate for people. Like I do have like my issues with certain groups and but like it's more so a lot of times like out of frustration, but it's interesting when you like try to just have a conversation. You can't even just say the word Jew because it's like the connotation of just coming out and saying that if you're not like wearing a furry hat and curly shit, it's like
People's buttholes pucker, man. You mention a Jew,
I
they run for the hills.
I play a speaker on my a Bluetooth speaker clipped to my shirt, and I'll listen to stuff about like Jews or the Bible, and I get uncomfortable because I'm like I don't really I do care if I get fired, but I just don't want the fucking the hostilities and the problems. But like to it's not even a lot of people when we have this conversation, especially when I get to know you better and start to understand your feelings, like you enjoy talking to Danny, you enjoy talking to Slav, who's also part of the tribe, and um, like
I do. I do.
um, and so it's not like it's like when I would hang out with in the punk scene, like I used to hang out with people that were fucking part of Antifa, and I also hung out with parts of people that were neo Nazis, and they also all hung out together at the same shows together, and it's all like bullshit. And it's interesting when you actually talk to somebody who you would like everyone that's an outsider, like especially like a boomer like my dad would be like, well, that's a rampant anti-Semite. I don't even have to talk to him. I don't need to learn. Like
That's a
it,
crazy person.
when we were talking about like Hitler and his ideas of the Jews, it's like maybe he was not so much hateful towards actually the Jews. He was hateful if he was looking for the lost tribe or the Aryans. It was more of like a not blasphemy, an impersonation, which is lying. And again, lying is creating a false reality, which is playing God. So, like, if you take it to that level, you can see where that frustration would go, and why you would have such an animosity towards people who call themselves Jews. When, like, if you look at Jews, as we've been saying on my last couple of streams and our conversations, it's that you can't pin it down. You know what a Chinese person looks like. You know what a Japanese person looks like. You know what an
Yeah.
Indian person looks like. But if you look at Israel and look at this ethno state of Jews, it's like you've got the most feral mongrel looking people all the way to people that look like you or me. Like they can't decide who the fuck they are. They're fucking
Genetics are ambiguous. They don't have genetic testing in Israel. So you're spot on.
and there's not it's not even a religion because you have most of the popular Jews that everybody likes are secular. They
Yeah,
don't have
atheist.
or atheists. They don't
Yep.
have, you know, like they don't have an actual religion or set of values or views. So it's like, what are these people like aside from just a liar?
And that's what I think it gets into. I I just think they're grifters, you know? They're a group of people that said, "You know what? We're going to attach ourselves to this chosen people thing, and we're going to trick everyone, and everyone's going to dance the way we want them to dance. If they don't, we're going to call them anti-Semitic, um, and we're going to get all our friends to gang up against them and try and fuck them monetarily to make their life difficult." It's it's very much something a liar and a grifter would do.
Yeah, because like it's like you hate us because we're Jewish, but like we don't hate you because we hate you because you're not Jewish. Actually, it's because
That's more accurate.
it's really like people hate you because you're not actually Jewish and you're lying and like you even just within your actual like orthodoxy or
We hate
your
that you're drinking baby's blood. We hate that you're snipping off the dicks of little kids and sipping from the penis. So like this, we hate usury. We hate your lies. It's I don't hate like a Jew just because he's a Jew and wears a yarmulke and has curly sideburns.
yeah,
You
because
know?
otherwise, I mean, like, I don't care. Like, I don't hate black people because they wear the fucking giant goose down jacket in fucking 106-degree weather and with a ski mask. It's more of your behavior and like just, but like,
Facts.
it's always like obfuscating like what the actual true reality is when you go and say that like I guess that's the big takeaway from this tonight is that like none of us hate you because you're Jews. It's more accurate to say we hate you because you're not Jews. I think.
And if we want to give them any credit for being Jews, I will give them this. They are of their father the devil. I'll give them that. Whether whether they're the old Jews of the and connected to the Jews who were told that same thing by Jesus Christ, they're definitely satanic. 100%. And we can agree on that. And Harold Wallace Rosenthal, as we know, stated, not many Jews like to admit this, but our God is Satan and we are his chosen people. And I think we could probably end it on that. That's pretty fire.
All right. Well, I'll probably keep you on the line, but I'm going to end the
Yeah, yeah.
stream. I appreciate you guys watching. Like if you want to, that'll help get more people to spread this knowledge. I think it's a good conversation. I'm not after making this into some. It would be cool if it turned into a bigger show. I actually don't want to turn into a giant show, but it would be cool if we could like get this information out there because my interest and as far as your interest I'm assuming too is that like we're trying to battle like we're trying to do the good fight and there's not really much you can do except for tell people like there's it's so hard to make action like it's just all you can do is spread the knowledge and that'll kind of get people together. So I appreciate you guys watching. Have a good night. I'll re-upload this stream from my audio, hopefully, so it can fix what we got. Get a pager sponsorship. Sure, I'll do that. Um, the the audio, if it was bad at the beginning from my end, we um, Jared's audio was good, so I'll re-upload this. And all right, good night, you guys.
Thank you,
Shalom.
everyone. Shalom.
All right, and then let me end it here.